Today might have been the craziest round yet. We had the clash between our two leaders, Caruana and Nepo. We had all sorts of decisive games. I am Logic. Let's see the action. Fabiano Caruana versus Jan Nepomniachtchi is a monumental matchup for this candidates and by extension for the chess world as a whole. Fabiano, Nepomniachtchi, the two leaders. Nepo is currently a point ahead of Fabiano going into this game. With a win, that means Caruana would catch up and be tied for first. A draw would keep Nepo's lead intact, and a win for Nepo would set him way far ahead of the pack. Let's watch how this game goes down. This one is a Petrov defense. Nepo's been using it in his match against Carlsen and the candidates so far, so Fabiano had some serious preparation lined up against Nepo. It starts with a number of common moves until finally here, Fabi basically makes a novelty. Knight h4 attacks Black's bishop, and we're going to see some serious prep from Fabi here. It threatens to go knight b4, so Fabi stops it. After f5 securing the knight, exchanges the pawns in the center, develops, rook comes to c8, f3, attacking the knight, Black counterattacks the knight on h4. After g3, here is the time situation. Fabi, an hour and 54 minutes. He has spent 6 minutes to make 17 moves. Nepo has an hour and 12 minutes. Nepo has been our fastest player this whole tournament. That's his game. He is the fastest player. Fabi's preparation, though, has netted him a 40-minute time advantage. A big success so far, but can Nepo repel Fabi's advantage? With the move knight d6, this one was a bit of a concession. First, you might wonder why can't you just take the knight here? The reason is that after taking back, you go trades. It turns out that even though white has this horrid structure with pawns everywhere, white's position is actually better here because white has a complete bind over the dark squares. The bishop and the dark squared pawns are going to do a great job for white. Going back, Black's best chance was actually to play bishop f6, attack the d4 pawn, and prepare to sacrifice your knight on e4. Nepo, though, was too scared to do this, instead choosing to just retreat his knight, which sent Fabi into a 30-minute think. What would you play here? Fabi played the strong move queen a4. His idea is that by trading the queens, he is getting rid of the defender of all of Black's central glob of minor pieces. The queens do come off the board. Both sides take a d-pawn. We have this hilarious position with 5 minor pieces on the d-file, bishop, knight, knight, bishop, bishop. Fabi, after rook e8, does miss an opportunity to play bishop d2, instead putting his bishop on a more active square like bishop f4, upsetting the fans, but making a good move objectively. After knight c5, attacking the bishop, check. This is the moment that is going to be talked about for this game, and maybe for chess history, because this basically decided the game between Caruana and Nepo, which could in turn decide the winner of this candidate's tournament. What would you do here? The correct move is bishop f1, retreating the bishop passively for now with the hope of bringing the bishop back out later. Now let's go over a few other options. One way white could play would be to bring the bishop back to either c2 or b1, trying to bring the bishop to the a2 diagonal. This gives Black the option of playing knight to b5. Without your bishop on f1 to cover that square, Black can go for this. And if you give a check, Black can play bishop e6. It turns out Black is fine here. The knight on b5 is important for Black. If we compare that to what happens after bishop f1, we'll see something similar. Bishop f1, we are attacking Black's knight on d6. If you take this way, white will take the knight, trade the rooks. After rook e8, rook d1 is very strong, hitting the bishop. The bishop can't move or else you'll lose your knight on c5. So knight e6, white can take on f5, attacking the bishop, forcing it to move back. After bishop c4, white is up a pawn and just has the completely dominant pieces here. Instead of that, Black could try to defend with the move knight c8. But having this knight on c8, forcing it backwards like this, gives white extra options with being able to take this knight. The bishop returns into the game, bishop c4. Black can block the check or move the king forward. If you move the king up, then we would give a check, play knight c7. This discovered check wins Black's rook. Instead, Black needs to block. They would play bishop e6. This is a big chance for Fabi. He could have sacrificed this exchange here. Knight takes, take on f5. You're threatening to take the bishop due to this pin. You also have knight d6 ideas in the air. After knight takes e7, you could take d4. Instead of that, if black tries to play king f6 to get out of the way of all of that, then you would play knight d5 check. If you take the knight, you get yourself immediately mated. If you play king g6, then you can trade, play the move rook d1. Here, white has a bishop and a pawn for the rook, but white actually has a big advantage because of black's king being exposed and white's pieces being more coordinated. Going back to the game, again, this was a huge miss for Fabi. Bishop f1 wouldn't have won the game immediately, but it would have kept the winning chances alive because the move Fabi makes instead, the game immediately peters out to a draw with a massive series of exchanges, forcing all of the pieces off the board and will reach an equal position. Material is now even, so this position was drawn by repetition a few moves later once the players agreed to a draw. Firouzja against Rapport was an exciting battle. Rapport chooses the Berlin. Firouzja plays d3. We see both sides develop, but black plays this knight d4 move, forcing the trade of knights. Now all of the bishops are kicked backwards. But here, Firouzja is able to start outplaying Rapport. He plays the move f4. Black is playing for a queenside expansion, but Firouzja is playing in the center and to attack Rapport's king, which once again, for what must be the millionth time this tournament, he has left uncastled. Rapport is just trying to help all of you learn why it is so very crucial that you castle. Rapport starts to push back Firouzja's pieces, but what would you do now? You could bring the knight backwards. You would retain an advantage, but knight takes e5 is incredibly strong. This sacrifice is only sacking a pawn because you get it back. Black is now up a pawn, but white has huge compensation. Black's king is stuck in the center, and we're going to see now that white also has complete control over the dark squares in this position. Black is unable to castle, which means that this is going to be big trouble for Rapport. Bishop c4 was a mistake. There was no reason to push this rook to f5, where it's even better placed and attacking your queen. Then what would you do here? Queen g3 is very strong. Black cannot afford to capture this rook because they would be opening up the e-file towards their own king and would be getting in big trouble. But otherwise, we have this threat on the g7 pawn. So knight d7 uncovers the queen to defend it and attacks their bishop, but now we can plant the bishop on d6. This was the other idea of queen g3. The queen supports the bishop on this incredibly powerful square. Queen comes back to d4. Then the rook finally retreats. h5. At this point, the position is almost actually over just because black can't get their king safe and white's pieces are so much stronger. There was really nothing Rapport could do after this point in the game, and it ends very quickly where finally black resigns. You cannot recapture the bishop because of this pin. Ding against Duda. Ding returns to his English opening, where we get a symmetrical structure out of the opening, and we do quickly go into an endgame this time. After d4, the pawn structure is symmetrical, which could mean the position is even, but it doesn't necessarily mean the position is a dead draw. So can Ding outplay Duda? We reach this endgame, where white has the worst structure, but although this pawn is doubled, it does help white gain some more control over the center and supports the next move, knight to e5. After a few more moves, white has good control of the d file, black has good control of the c file, leaving the position around balanced. This rook is strong, bishop c2, the rooks get traded off. After leaving the back rank, trying to activate the rook, it does allow a tactic for Ding. What would you play? You can take advantage of black's back rank issues with knight takes a5. You cannot take back because of the threat of rook c8. So g6 is played. Ding grabs a pawn, but still around even because of Duda's active pieces. He manages to get the rook to c1. After knight takes b6, what would you do for black here? It's very important to avoid a trade of rooks. If you trade the rooks, you are losing all of your counterplay that is associated with the activity of this rook. So rook b1 or rook a1 were both good moves. Rook b1, king goes up to g2, otherwise black was threatening bishop e2. Duda grabs back his pawn, though Ding does still have chances here with the passed a pawn that he's starting to push up the board. That being said, Duda's activity should be good enough to hold the position, but around here is where Duda makes the losing mistake. He had to make a very weird move. He had to play this move bishop to h5. The natural bishop takes e4 is what he played, but we're going to see the problem with that is that white plays rook c7. This rook goes after this f7 pawn and would be winning the game. The point of bishop h5 is now you can meet rook to c7, going after this pawn with g5, opening up your bishop to defend. If they take, you can take back. There are a lot of threats. g5 is hanging, f2 is hanging. This would keep the position balanced. Instead of that, after bishop takes e4, the position is now winning for Ding. Rook comes to c7, like we discussed. The rook takes the pawn. Rook swings back over. Now white has the passed a pawn. Should be able to convert. Just requires some technique. And speaking of that technique, can you find the winning plan for white? Our rook is amazing. Our bishop is great. But what piece isn't so good? The king on g1. With this rook on a2, our king is completely cut off. It can't go forward. This is a common theme. In fact, we're doing the same thing to black's king. Black's king is also stuck. If it ever tries to run over, well, then we have the bishop here to stop it. Our king, though, can run over. This is the path towards improving white's position. The king is going to go all the way to b1. White is going to aim to set up a zugzwang where white will be able to get their king up once this rook is forced to leave this position. Because black's rook is going to be stuck protecting against this pawn, the bishop is going to be stuck protecting the rook. Let's see what I'm saying. So the king walks over. Black has nothing to do. Black eventually abandons their previous defensive setup, but once white brings the king up the a pawn, the position would be completely winning, so black resigned. The king is going to escort the pawn towards promotion. The other most significant game for our standings is this one between Radjabov and Nakamura. Nakamura coming off a huge win yesterday where he beat Fabiano Caruana. Nakamura could potentially make a run for it and come back in this tournament. That being said, his dreams lie in this game against Radjabov. Nakamura may be looking for chances against Radjabov since Radjabov has been struggling a bit in this tournament. Naka picks the Berlin, where we basically just end up getting this sort of symmetrical structure from both sides. But Nakamura is about to go wrong quite early on with the move bishop g4. This was a mistake. He needed to just play bishop b6, keep the a5 pawn defended. With the move bishop g4, though, Nakamura is going for an attack. He is hoping that even when Radjabov is able to weaken the queenside structure and grab the a pawn, for instance, after what we see here, black has a weakened queenside structure. White is up a passed outside a pawn, but white's king is weaker. Nakamura was putting all of his hope on attacking white's king, but it turns out there's just no attack there. Radjabov defends very well, and black is just never able to really get the ball rolling on the king side. Queen e6, queen e2 over to defend. The knight looks scary, but whenever you put a knight on f4, white can always take it with their bishop, so it's hard to bring more pieces into the attack. b4, meanwhile, Radjabov has an easy plan of promoting this a pawn. This was not the move played in the game, but if black played f5, what would you do? Since white is up a pawn and black's only counterplay is coming in the form of an attack on the white king, a queen trade would be great for white. So either queen c4 or queen a2, either move forces a queen trade, nullifying black's attack and would leave white winning. That explains Nakamura's move king h8, getting off that diagonal, so that soon enough he can go for this move f5, but the problem is there's just really not an attack there. Radjabov is able to trade off that bishop. Then they trade off queens, where Nakamura does win one pawn back, but right away, Radjabov is getting ready to push this passed a pawn. The passed pawns on the queen side are just too strong. There's no stopping them. Now white has two passers. Nothing black can do to stop them. Here, Nakamura resigns. A big blow. Yesterday was an amazing game, but today was a huge defeat for Nakamura. Today was hugely impactful for our standings. With a draw against Caruana, Nepo has secured his lead. He has 6.5 points out of 9. Fabi is still the closest, behind with 5.5. So Caruana is a full point behind Nepo. Then Nakamura and Ding a full point behind Fabi. Naka lost today, wasn't able to make any ground to catch up towards the top. Ding, though, after starting with a loss in round 1, finally gets a win, and with all draws in between, is back on a 50% score. After that, we have Radjabov, Firouzja, and Rapport all on 4 points, while Duda is in last place with 3 points. You do need to keep in mind that while first place is definitely what all these players are aiming for and the dream, Second place could matter too. Normally, candidates is a winner-take-all format, but if you recall Carlsen's statement about maybe not playing the World Championship, well, if he doesn't pick to play, then the top 2 finishers of the candidates play a match against each other. So this could be a race for second place. There's a big question here. What do you do if you're one of these players, Caruana, Nakamura, any of these players in the hunt for the lead now? Do you go all in, play for first place and first place only, or do you try to secure second place in the hopes that that will be good enough? Which strategy do you think the players will adopt? Let me know in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching the video.